Hi everybody, I'm John, nice to see you. I've been playing sax for most of my life and I love it. I love the energy of playing live music for people like you, and it's always such a thrill. But even back when I was a teenager, I had another creative passion, and that was poetry. Here's what I do. Oh, geez, sorry. Forgot you guys were there. You know, writing, it's such a private activity. You really have to shut the rest of the world out. Same thing when you're reading, as opposed to playing sax when it's all about bringing people in. Yeah, they're so different. And even back when I was a teenager, I got very interested, you might even say obsessed, with trying to figure out this strange contrast between my practice as a musician and my practice as a poet. Because if I picked up my horn and played music in clubs, which I used to do all the time, well, people would dance, they would flirt, sometimes they might fight or fall in love. It was a carnival of human possibility. Whereas, if I picked up my pen and wrote a poem, nothing happened. I mean, I'd send them off to little magazines, and once in a great while, one of them might even get published, but nobody I knew ever read one, ever. My experience of poetry was no experience at all. And I was like, how could this be? Because my creative impulse was absolutely the same. It was identical, it was the same impulse. But if I picked up one tool, my saxophone, well, anything was possible. Communal life flowered. But if I picked up another tool, my pen, I was utterly alone. And that's how I first understood, a long time ago, that the tools we use to communicate actually shape our experience. They even shape our identity. I came to the conclusion eventually that they shape our world. For most of human history, for 1 million years and more, we have been dialogical beings. Our only media was embodied speech, talk like this. And talking is a two-way street. To talk is always to be present, always to acknowledge interrelatedness. Every conversation is also a relationship and a community. Now, for the past 5,000 years or so, since the invention of writing, we have become monological beings. Our primary communication technology was text, and text is a one-way technology. You can't talk back to a book or a poster or a tax form. It doesn't hear you. It doesn't care. To read or write is always to embrace solitude and stillness and silence, as you would be able to tell if this library was up and running, in which case I would never be able to make the kind of noise that I'm making now. Well, today, at the dawn of the Datazoic era, we are becoming dialogical again. Our emerging media are all networked, and you can talk to the network, and it will listen, and it will respond instantly, constantly, endlessly. Our networked future has this in common with our oral past, that for each, the essence of every social event is dialogue, interchange, give and take, collaboration. For example, oral culture is all about improvisation. Well, is it a surprise then that similarly dialogical digital culture is all about remixes and mashups? Oral culture's gift economies are digital culture's shareware. folklore and mythology and folk songs, the communal knowledge management realms of oral cultures, are analogous to digital culture's open source code and open source communities. If you've ever bought anything at a market in an oral environment in Morocco or Jamaica or Indonesia or Mali, anywhere, you'll know that you don't just go up and buy something. You gotta jam it out. You have to talk. You have to barter. The transaction is only part of it, and in many cases, it's less important than the talk. If you really want to, you can force yourself to just buy something and try and skip the talk, but you'll be not only paying the top possible price, so be considered very foolish for doing so, but more importantly, you'll be considered not just rude, but essentially subhuman for not knowing how to make it about the relationship. It's beyond rude. It's just not how people are. Whereas, if you've ever bought something in a literate environment like ours, which I know that each of you has, you know that the transaction is what matters. The talk is completely irrelevant. There's no relationship whatsoever when you buy a Snickers bar. It's an utterly anonymous event. It has nothing to do with the people. It's totally standardized, and that's what it's about. Whereas again, in the digital realm, what we find is that dialogical thing happens. When you go on eBay to buy something, the buyer and seller actually have a relationship. It may not be the same intensity as the one in the marketplace, but you get to know who that person is. You check their reputation. You actually exchange information and chat with them. You are in a much more personalized setting. Now, literate values are very different from dialogical, oral, and digital values. Literacy values fixity above all. Not improvisation, not remix. Let me ask you, in this space, does a lot of improvisation and remix happen? No. It's about fixing things, and that makes sense. That's what paper and writing are for, fixing information. Every literate institution, be it a bank or a government or a university or a hospital or a power plant or a factory or what have you, they're all founded on the notion that information must be inscribed on paper. And that paper could be letters of incorporation, a patent, a stock, an invoice, a contract, a bill, a deed, a border, what have you. Again, there are a million examples, but the point is that information needs to be inscribed on paper, and that above all, that paper must be respected. You cannot ignore the piece of paper we call the Constitution. You cannot ignore the pieces of paper that are law books. You cannot ignore the pieces of paper that are contracts. On and on. Those papers rule our social infrastructure. They rule us. And most of us would say, here in our highly literate culture, that paper rules us well. Most people would say, those are all good things. But there is a cost to all of that literacy. For example, some of you may not know that during our very own lifetime, half of all the languages in the world will vanish. Over 3,000 oral languages, each belonging to an ancient oral culture, an ancient oral people, will vanish, along with those cultures and those peoples. Each of those languages containing a vocabulary that has unlocked for countless generations the mysteries of self and space, self and soul, self and so much else. Cosmic consciousness, shamanic wisdom, the ancient sounds of being beyond the bookish world, lost, all lost, never to return. It is a moment, a fateful moment for humanity. But we literate citizens are so deaf to non-literate experience, we don't even notice it happening. But even more remarkably, that end of primordial oral consciousness with which we have shaped ourselves as a species over 99.99% of our history, that end is taking place during the very same lifetime as a new beginning. That conclusion occurs alongside a beginning of potentially equal evolutionary significance. I'm talking, of course, about the internet, linking billions of people around the world in real time, the next storytelling bomb. And what all of that means is that we are living at the epic conjunction of the three ages of our human being, the three cultures of our human history, the three operating systems of our civilization. A conjunction that no humans before us have ever experienced, and none after us ever will again. We alone are in touch with both the last of our oldest oral ancestors and the first children of our distant digital future, even as some of us enjoy the fruits of our profoundly literate present. So in this respect, too, we are living at a critical point in the evolution of humanity.